Hello. So the big announcement has been made. The first set of refinements to the Army's force structure has been announced by the Defence Secretary, in line with the outcome of the Strategic Defence and Security Review 2015. The Chief of the General Staff has now issued a warning order to the chain of command, and this provides commanders with the information they need to plan and implement the preliminary phases of what's known as Army 2020 Refine. So what's it going to mean for the Army? Well, with me now is the Head of Strategy, Brigadier Rowley Walker, who's been closely involved with the concept and design of these changes. Now, Brigadier, these are going to be implemented over the next 5 years, and we will talk about that, how it's going to affect the Army as a whole. In simple terms, what is Army 2020 Refine?
Probably not the big deal that people think it's going to be. We've been working on it for 18 months, and simply put, it is the implementation of the SDSR measures as they affect the Army. Importantly, the SDSR reflected the upturn in national ambition for defence and security that the National Security Strategy outlined. For the Army, that means fundamentally changing what we call the force driving principles behind the Army.
Right. So what are the key structural changes? We're talking brigades, all sorts here. What are the key structural changes?
So the big idea is that, where before the Army was organised and structured to be able to sustain a brigade in perpetuity on an enduring stabilisation operation, in this defence review, what's now being asked of the Army is to be able to field a modernised warfighting division. So that's up to 3 brigades with all of the close support and general support enablers. That's one aspect of what's been asked of us. The second aspect is to make a significant enhancement to our contribution to defence engagement. And that has led us to review and refine the structure of the Army in order to meet those requirements.
And this means, for example, changes to infantry battalions? You talk about specialised battalions?
Absolutely. So the first key observable change that the Army will recognise is the creation of a specialised infantry group, we can come back to that, and a strike experimental group. And these are the preliminary moves to create 2 strike brigades alongside 2 armoured infantry brigades, and that's principally what we will use to fight wars at scale at the divisional level. And then our enhancement to defence contribution to defence engagement will be the specialised infantry battalions and the formation commanders above them.
Let's talk then about these strike brigades. What will their function be?
So strike it represents a structure, i.e. there will be 2 brigades. It represents a new way of operating because we are introducing new equipment which will allow us to achieve tactical effects in different ways. First and foremost, it is grouping armoured units equipped with Ajax vehicles and in due course mechanised infantry units with a mechanised infantry vehicle. Behind that you will then integrate the ELITAXIS communication system and then a whole series of follow-on modernisation programmes which will allow the strike brigades to principally enable manoeuvre at the divisional level, first and foremost. So it's a new way of operating as well as a structure.
So presumably the formation of strike brigades is going to mean the loss of other brigades? What's going to go?
Once we've changed the Army structure, and the head mark is to have done this by 2025, which is why we're taking an incremental approach to this, the Army will have 2 armoured infantry brigades, 2 strike brigades, a specialised air assault brigade and 6 infantry brigades. So that's pretty well the same number that we have today, but there is some reorganisation of brigades and who does what. So, for example, I can say that our armoured infantry brigades will be based on 12 Brigade and 20 Brigade. Our strike brigades will be based on a new brigade that will be formed out of the strike experimental group and by converting 1 brigade to the strike role, and our infantry brigades will continue as they are, as will the air assault. So that's how we will get to the new structure. International by design, that's written into the SDSR. We are working very hard to be as interoperable with our primary allies and partners in the most likely scenarios. A strike brigade would be capable of working within a sovereign UK division. That's its primary role, to enable manoeuvre at the divisional level, but clearly it would be capable of operating independently as part of a coalition effort.
Right. Now, the starting point for this seems to be a strike experimentation group.
Yes.
What's that?
So this is reflecting the reality that the equipment is being delivered from early next year in terms of the Ajax vehicles. We will use about 2 to 3 years of time to take units out of the line into the strike experimental group, where they will then field the new equipment, train with it, practice with it, test it, experiment with it, and that way we will develop the tactics, techniques and procedures.
So the role then is right. So the role is to develop the tactics, how it's going to the doctrine and so on.
Absolutely, it's exactly that. Now this has already started. So today there are units in the army working in synthetic environments, experimenting with the strike concept. And this will continue it on by using live training with real soldiers.
But when it comes to units, which units will come into this group, this strike experimentation group?
So the strike experimental group, which forms up early next year in 2017, it will, by 2018, it will have the first 2 units, combat units assigned. They will be the Household Cavalry Regiment and the Scots Guards. And they will join the strike experimental group, and they will then take the vehicles coming off the production line as well as vehicles that are already in service and bring them together and start exercising and experimenting. They will be supported by logistic troops as well.
Right. Are they going to be based where? Is there a change there?
So initially, no, but in due course, in line with the Defence of State strategy, we will align units by capability in sensible centres of mass. So for example, it will mean that in due course, the Household Cavalry will move to Salisbury Plain and the Scots Guards will move to Catterick, for example, and that reflects the principles for Defence of States.
Right, and sorry, you were saying some other units coming into this group as well?
So then in 2019, we will complete the order of battle for the strike experimental group, and they will take on the King's Royal Hussars, who will be in the armoured role, and 4 Scots, who will be in the mechanised infantry role. And that way you end up with your square strike brigade. It's at that point, interestingly enough, that the strike experimental group will become a brigade. So it will take a number, take a badge, and it'll join the army as a brigade.
So they will form the first brigade, the first strike brigade, with other units coming in?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. The next key change we ought to look at in this announcement is these specialised infantry battalions. Now, what are they and what are they going to do?
So this is a reflection of our strategic assumptions and deductions, which reflect the changing character of conflict. And it was clear to us in the run-up to the SGSR that the army needed to be even more forward and focused in overseas areas. We've got the Defence's regional priorities, and the CGS felt it was important to commit to much greater persistence and a much greater presence in terms of our approach to overseas capacity building. So he agreed with the Chief Defence Staff and the Secretary of State to create a new role. So this is a new role for infantry, which we've never had before.
These are what? These are full-size battalions?
So these are modelled on infantry battalions that exist today. So you start with what you've got. The size and structure is very much replicating the US Special Forces battalions, who are and have for years been forward and focused and engaged for capacity building.
So a smaller size battalion doing this?
So these will be smaller in size of establishment, but they'll have a much heavier ratio of senior ranks, senior warrant officers, non-commissioned officers, and officers to reflect the nature of their task, which is to train, advise and assist and mentor partner.
So how does this differ? Does it differ at all from the short-term training teams that we've got?
Well, in one obvious regard is that they're not just training teams. These are teams that will train initially, but they will also advise and assist and accompany. So this speaks to our experiences coming out of Iraq and Afghanistan, where you need to go with your partners rather than leaving them, to go out on their own and you stay behind and just do the training. So this reflects a commitment, a much greater commitment to working with partners and allies to build capacity in the first instance. It will give us a much clearer understanding of what's going on in these countries so that we can shape and understand and influence the outcome of events before they become problems. And if we do have to respond, we are more likely to be able to respond with greater precision because of that instinctive understanding.
And then the units that are going to move into these specialised infantry battalions, who's involved in that? Which units?
So in the first wave, we will have 2 units that will convert to specialised infantry role. So the specialised infantry group headquarters will form up in January. By April next year, we would anticipate the first 2 units coming under command. That will be 4 rifles and 1 Scots. And then they will go through a conversion to their new role. They'll change their size, shape, structure, upskill the personnel, reorganise across the divisions of infantry to ensure they're correctly manned and structured, with a view to them being operational by autumn next year and getting out on the battlefield doing their job.
And where will that be? Do you know yet where they'll be deployed?
So Defence has given us its regional priorities. They are Europe, the Middle East, North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. Clearly where these units will go, our aspiration is that they will have a regional focus, and that will then be their regional focus in perpetuity. That way you build up the cultural, the linguistic experience, and you begin to get the benefit of inherited experience being passed down through the ranks. We would anticipate one of those probably being in the Middle East, most likely given the strategic situation, and another one in Sub-Saharan Africa.
But these battalions will be based in the UK, will they?
So be based in the UK,
Yes.
and they will have their own internal readiness mechanism whereby they will be able to sustain a persistent presence overseas in their areas of responsibility on a perpetual basis.
And this is just infantry personnel involved in these, is it?
So they are modelled on infantry battalions because the skills and demands of the role are most clearly aligned to infantry, but clearly it takes all arms to put units into the field, and therefore this will have all arms capabilities integrated into them.
And what happens if the structure of these specialised infantry battalions is based on senior NCOs and above? What happens to private soldiers?
So within each division of infantry, the staff will redistribute the private soldiers into the mechanised, armoured and light role infantry battalions. And that way there will be no loss of personnel. There'll be a redistribution within the division of infantry in order to create this new role.
There's been a lot announced recently under the Better Defence Estate strategy, the best location for units in the future. Presumably this all fits in with it, does it?
Absolutely. Now, the Defence Estate strategy was announced a couple of weeks ago, but there's nothing in what we're talking about today that was not developed hand in glove with the DIO. So this is absolutely consistent.
So the UK Army footprint, if you like, in terms of this,
Yes.
will mean perhaps a couple of examples of what will
So
be where as a
What the
result.
Defence Estate strategy, and the Army will know this, is about a third of our built estates, so barracks, for want of a better word, are going to need to be vacated over the next 15 or 20 years and then disposed of. So we know that is upon us. What we've then done is taken that inevitability and made a virtue of it by organising sensible centres of mass by capability as close to, for example, training areas or centres of population as possible.
Like what?
So for an example there, well-known principle is that it is sensible to group tracked units as close to their training areas as possible. So our principal training area is Salisbury Plain, so you won't be unsurprised to see the majority of our combat tracked units, in fact all our combat tracked units, will eventually be based around Salisbury Plain.
And elsewhere across the country, you've got certain specialisations in the Midlands.
So it's not just training areas, because of course what we're trying to do is align people to where they are best able to recruit from. So for example, our communications and signals community, very technical. We would like to establish a centre of mass around the West Midlands where you've got the Defence College of Technical Training, and you've got a lot of private sector industry involved in the tech sector.
OK, final thoughts. Looking at the Army as a whole,
Yeah.
what's this going to mean for members of the Army Reserve? What's it going to mean for the civilian workforce?
Yeah. So this Army 20 Refine is the integrated army of 112,000, 82,000 regulars and 30,000 reservists. So no change to Army 2020 in that regard. Indeed, when you look at the requirement to field a modernised division, it is essential that the reserve, the Army Reserve, is an integral part of that. So they are hardwired into the force generation plans for our ability to fight a war at scale. Indeed, such has been the demand that we are having to increase the number of units, for example. So there will be 2 new infantry reserve units and a new EOD unit. So, and that reflects the demands of defence policy.
So that's the Army Reserve side, the civilian workforce?
Yes. Civilian workforce, there is a follow-on programme to do with civilian structures, which was announced by the MOD. Our work principally, which involves what we refer to as the generating force, that's where a lot of the civilian restructuring will be done hand in glove with any changes to the way, for example, we run our training depots or our schools or our major headquarters. Of course, any changes to our civilian structures will be run through the normal trades union consultation process.
One final thought, because questions are asked. Cat badges. Is this about losing cat badges? Will cat badges go as a result?
So I can assure you there are no losses of cat badges in this. There are units that will no longer be needed in the future, in which case unit headquarters, say for example, in a large corps, will be disbanded, all their personnel will be redistributed, but there are no loss of cat badges.
Brigadier Rowley Walker, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
So there's the background really of how Army 2020 Refine is going to affect how the organisation operates over the next few years. Now clearly there's a lot more to find out, and inevitably more detail will become apparent as the process evolves. We'll aim to bring you more information on that as we have it, so do let us know if this, and indeed similar conversations, would be of use to you, so you know more about what's going on. Your feedback is really important. There are contact details coming up in a moment. Thank you for watching.